Thank you. Well, friends and art and science lovers. Today, we're in for a real special treat. We have an Iranian-born artist here, Sholeh Asgary, who not only she is an artist, but she's a storyteller. I met Sholeh last week. Lauren and I met her last week while she gave us a tour of her exhibit in the Yerba Buena Center of the Arts, which was wonderful. But what really impressed me with what I saw that day was Sholeh's paying attention to so much detail that when she does these exhibits and she puts them together, she's actually hearing, listening, researching the environment and incorporating the sounds in the environment. So that was very impressive to me that she spent so much time. She spends a lot of research, a lot of science goes into her art. It was incredible. She is a sound artist, and lately, and she's going to talk to us about it, but she incorporates water and sound and light together in her art. So I would like to, well, actually, she also teaches at UC Berkeley. She's a lecturer at UC Berkeley. And she loves to share her art and her knowledge with all of us. Anyway, I would like to welcome you, Sholeh, to this talk. Really honored to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And it's been such a treat to get to know Mitra and finally meet you all in person. And to meet Lauren in person, have the tour today. That was very exciting on campus. And also thank you, Amanda, for putting together, arranging things, and gosh, and so many people. I'd have to thank Barry for the fun that we had when we toured the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. We hopped over to SF MoMA, and we had fun playing with imaging and gadgets and such. And last but not least, I really want to thank Skip Victor. Thank you for putting this visionary series together and inviting us in, and all the research that you did to find and sort of pick all the artists around, and also Getty Museum and Stanford Medical Library. So thank you, everyone. And everyone who helped me get pull up my speaker notes. So I'm going to share some work, obviously, but my aim is to not speak for more than 45 minutes. So if you see me looking down, it's because I have a timer. And hopefully it'll be a little bit less, but I really, afterwards, or even throughout, invite you in for conversation. That's one of the favorite parts about my work, is because I get to learn about your practice, learn about my practice, and it just expands so much more through dialogue. And while a lot of these pieces, they're presented as my works or my artworks, I have to acknowledge that it's really not the result of a singular individual. Each of these pieces have developed through dialogue with so many people and so many communities. And I wish I could call them, to me, they're collaborations. And so I think, this part of this dialogue is very, very important. I might even do a little quick kind of listening workshop with you. You seem like a lovely group. So, all right. So, starting with this, one of the things that I always think about, what really guides my work, is questions. And I also say that to my students: lead with questions, lead with the questions. If you're searching for answers, you're going to reach a dead end. And that's no fun. And so some of my favorite projects for me are the projects that really become teachers to me, and they unfold for me over time. I might discover new facets of them a year out, 2 years out, and that's the most exciting thing. So sometimes I have these moments where I make something and I might be a little bit, in some ways, sad or underwhelmed because I think, wait, is this doing anything? Am I getting it? And I realize, no, I'm not ready yet. I'm not asking the right questions, and it's grown, and now I need to let it allow me to grow through time with it. And so that's something that I really push into a lot. And so in my work, I find myself regularly returning to water, coming back to the water, and I find that water has this capacity to hold so much. There's a leakiness of water that I really am fascinated with. Water leaks, it blends things, it merges things, it changes currents, right? And it shapes you and is shaped by your immersion within it as well. And so I also think a lot about sound. And to me, sound is very similar. It's a very leaky medium. It also is difficult to be contained. And in fact, some of the terminologies sometimes are very similar when talking about sound or water. We think about waves as well. And also with light, when talking about light, I feel it's very similar. Perhaps maybe a little bit easier to block out light, but also light is it's such an interesting medium to me, both the history of it photographically and how our visuality as a culture is constructed. And I'm very much also interested in deconstructing that in certain ways. So I think about sound really as a life force and this breath of exchange. And one of the other things that I also think about is place, site specificity, distance of places, the way that we remember or experience places. And I also consider situatedness and how histories of time and place affect the travel and the context of sound, carrying with it so much more than meets the eye, and traveling infinitely slower than visible data or light. I think of sound. Sound to me is intersectional, it's political, and it's fluid. It's very much like the oceans and themselves in that same capacity to be leaky and to merge. And so as an artist, I've been lately thinking a lot about different places and how the way that we listen to a place can reveal sometimes more about us and what we're tuned to, as well as the place and how those places sound different. I've been very much interested in what's wanted and unwanted noises, right? What's noise and what's sound, or signal, noise and signal, and what that reveals about what we value and what our ears, again, are tuned to in ourselves. So a lot of this inquiry extends, really, it's so much also about my own lived experiences, but only in as much as anyone's lived experiences informs the way that they move through the world. And so I think for me, early on as a child, I moved around a lot. And this also really, I think, affected the way that I think about place and that kind of at once both merging, but also very separate and distant. So these experiences not only inform the core of my work, but I also examine these positions as these sites of tension between visibility and opacity, history and myth, world making and death. And without thinking about these things as being binary or in opposition to one another, they can actually exist within the same larger spectrum. And that kind of takes me back to the water in a lot of ways. So this might be, maybe we could just do a little sounding workshop together. I'm inspired by our tour of the anatomy building and seeing everything, but this is part of a larger workshop series that I run, and I've actually adapted the curriculum for these series of scores that are for body and space and sound and voice into a graduate course last semester. But usually each workshop is 45 minutes, but we're going to just do a really quick 5-minute one and just see how it goes. It might just totally not work out. But that's what we accept. That's fine. So maybe if we could just spend like, I would say about like a minute or so, just listening. And I'll kind of guide you through things, and it's going to get weird. It's a nonverbal thing, and you'll be making sound too. But let's see if we can kind of accelerate it. So just listen to the room. You might become aware of what direction certain sounds are coming from. So just listen to, think about what can you hear in here? What can you not hear? What do you imagine to hear? And all of these sounds are a part of it. So as you keep listening and imagining, right, and listening with your whole body. And all of these sounds are a part of it, just listening to your whole body, thinking to the hum of this room, the doors opening, fidgeting, anything. And if that helps, close your eyes too, that might be helpful. I want you to just, you're gonna pick, so this is called an excavation of a future presence. And you're going to, we're actually gonna use our bones because they're ancient as a way to communicate with other parts of our bodies. And we're gonna actually vocalize the sounds or the information they give us as sounds. So this is where it gets kind of weird, but just stick with it. So close your eyes, imagine a bone in your body, any bone. Usually the first bone that kind of comes to your mind is the one. Everyone has a bone? Right. I need to get my bone. So this is the nonverbal part, and if you feel more comfortable closing your eyes, keep your eyes closed. But imagine this bone is trying to communicate something to you, and it's communicating to you through sound, and it's nonverbal. But sound, what does that sound like? That information it's communicating, it's a bone, so it doesn't speak in the way that we do. What does it sound like? Does it make weird noises? Is it low? Is it high pitched? Does it sort of stutter or pulsate? And I'll start, and then I hope that you'll sort of join in and feel more comfortable. Now imagine this bone is carrying you, it's kind of like with the magic school bus. It's going to carry you through other places in your body, and it may encounter skin, fat, muscle. Oh my God. It looks like someone sounds just like my bone. That's so cute. Oh, it's totally fine here. And welcome, yeah. All sounds are welcome. And beings. So remember that sound and that bone. It's now going to take you to different parts in your body. Imagine it's like a magic school bus. It might encounter neurons, networks, organs, your heart, skin, fat, blood, vessels. And every time it meets a different place in your body, it might have a different interaction. It also changes, right? And so we're going to start with the bone's resting place, and we're just going to take a minute traveling through our body. Let it guide you. What kind of information does it communicate with these places, and how can you try to excavate that in sound? And we'll do that for a minute, and we'll see where we end up. And once you feel that it's taking you where it needs to. So that was a super accelerated version of it. How many of you, that was weird, right? But maybe interesting for you. How many of you ended up with your bone somewhere else from where it started? You did, right? Yeah, and it's there. So, so this aspect of this exercise, it's a whole series and it's usually 45 minutes. It's really for you to kind of listen, and thinking about sound is nothing is an interruption and everything is a part of it. And it's matter that's also affecting us as we move through it. So I encourage you, if you need to send your bone back to where it needs to go, please feel free to do it throughout the lecture. And that's something that you can do, or you can sit with it there and think about, right, what has affected that change? Is there something different in the way that you interact with that body part now, with that bone? Or did it release something or open something up? So what we hear and what we don't hear often can tell us just as much. So what we don't hear can often tell us just as much, if not more than what we hear. And sometimes even more than speaking, I feel. Sometimes words might be coded, but yet an inflection in a voice can convey so much more than the actual word and the actual phrase. And sometimes silence can be incredibly loud. So a lot of my early experiences sort of seeded within me somewhat of a distrust of the image in certain ways, as some kind of an authoritative representation of experience or memory. And this actually shaped my foundational work in photography. So I don't really make photographs anymore. I create a lot of installations, sound pieces, and I do performances as well. But these are sort of in the background or in the core, in the way that I talk about light. And this also extends into examining how technological frameworks might shape our interactions with space, history, sound, and one another. My creative work really looks to sort of like to reveal these as these complex sites. And it's a conglomeration of visual processes, sound processes, and also collective processes. As Mitra mentioned, I'm an artist and educator, and I also do sound performances. So I'm going to move into this piece, Anahita. And Anahita, I consider it as one of my sort of foundational pieces that I think really set me thinking a lot and more actively about water, or I should say with water. And after Anahita, I'm going to show you another piece called Hana. These were created in the same sort of time between 2018 and 2019. So Anahita is a piece that is using light, sound, touch, and water. What you're looking at is a speculative water clock. It's not a real water clock. So here's some images of water clocks. Some of you might know what a water clock is. They were the earliest methods, time-telling devices. And in ancient Iran, they were used to determine solstices, and later on also served as a tool to ensure equal water distribution to shareholders through the Hanot system, which I'll talk about. So the way that a water clock works is you have a smaller basin with a hole in the bottom, when inside of a larger basin filled with water, and as that smaller basin is placed in there that's empty, it fills up with water from the bottom, hits the bottom, makes like a sound, and that's 1 unit of time. And so typically those who guarded or kept time for the water distribution would keep time of this. And they usually use their ears to listen, because staring at it is a lot of work. So these were the timekeepers. So in Anahita, the piece that you saw, the water clocks were speculative. They're more relational units of time telling in relation to each other. In ancient Iran, the water clocks or sa'at abi, they were used so precisely that they were able to determine the exact moments or precise moments of those solstices. That's how precise they were. So in this piece, in my piece Anahita that I'll get to, I'm really asking what happens when we think about water determining time. What happens when we think about time in a fluid way? Although it's precise, it's still determined by our moon and our stars, as opposed to a workday calendar or something like that. So in Anahita, viewers are invited into the piece to interact with the water clocks. The room is dimly lit blue. It's painted 18% gray. Anyone who works with photography knows that 18% gray. It's the sort of considered to be the middle zone of determining an exposure, and all such technology is based on that middle exposure. but we all know that this isn't accurate. It doesn't actually account for the full range of skin tones. And so I think about this as, 18% gray is a sort of 18% reflectance of violence through technology in that way. So surrounding the space are these fingers that are plaster fingers, they're digits, and I'm specifically talking towards our two certain historicities within Islam, and also thinking of these as sort of like an anti-relic. So within the piece, it's called Anahita, and I should mention Anahita is a goddess of water. She's an ancient Zoroastrian goddess of water. And throughout patriarchies, religions, and empires, eventually Anahita becomes sort of syncretic. She's diluted, becomes other things, or adapted and such. So I was really interested in this piece, thinking about these as being speculative, and thinking about this relational experience, and thinking about what happens if I sort of intertwine Anahita into this piece. Is a sort of a depositioning of linear history as some kind of a patriarchal storytelling, as opposed to what we think about it being. And so there's a lot of relationships in this piece too, thinking about the relationship and control of water and time, labor and war as well. And so it's one of the other things with the room, I should say, is that all the walls are painted the 18% gray. There's a blue light, and the walls were also amplified with the sound of water. I had installed this in New York. That was the first place where I exhibited this piece. And I took the sound of actually a pipe in the building, and I rerouted that and amplified the walls using transducers. So one of the things I really enjoy with these pieces are the conversations that ensue. So this becomes a gathering space. People share different stories about their relationship to water, cultural relationships to time. And a lot of stories would emerge from that and that exchange of it within this moment. So I'm actually going to hop over right now and sort of zoom through a bit. So Ghanots, I spoke about the Ghanots. The Ghanot was an aqueduct system that was created in ancient Iran sometime in the first millennium BCE. And it's actually the root technology of a lot of things that we see today. Those that were created in Iran are still in use. It was from here that it ended up going to the Romans, and the Romans were aqueducts and such. The Ghanots exist in Afghanistan and China, North Africa, Iraq, Syria, Spain, Italy. They're quite expansive. And what the Ghanots did was they allowed water to be delivered to arid regions by tapping into and redirecting groundwater, usually by locating an alluvial fan in a landscape or a wadi. It's the same thing, and through a series of these highly engineered, it's just such a marvel. We're able to sort of create multiple shafts that lead down. So you see what we call the mother well is the one closest to me, that locates the groundwater, and then through a whole, it's just insane. I don't know how this is done. I mean, I know a little bit, but still I just can't wrap my mind around it. It's using gravity to then redirect water into other regions where cultivation could be possible, life could be possible, and such. So all of those channels at the top, they're not wells. They're actually just channels to dig and to connect the longer channel on the bottom together. And then the opening looks something like this. So what interested me about the Ghana as well is that it was so intergenerational. The amount of labor that it took to create one of these was immense. It was usually very poorly paid. It was very poorly paid, in fact. It was very dangerous, very much like mining. But it was an intergenerational job of creating these, because one might dig these and know that they won't see the results or the fruit of their labor in their lifetime, but it was for the generations to come, for future. Also, the way that the Ghanots worked was that they would open up to multiple farms or multiple areas. So if one group or one community took all the water or opened up their sort of like gates to it and took all the water, then there wouldn't be enough for everyone else. So there's also this relational awareness through just the way that this works and seeing how it runs through the space. So I created this piece called Ghanot, and this is from 2018, and it's very simple. It's a condenser microphone. There's a traditional Iranian rug. The center of the rugs traditionally would symbolize a fountain, not necessarily depict a fountain of water. And underneath it is a bulge, so I placed a bass transducer underneath it. And I'm actually playing the sound of a water, like a river through the rug. I'm using the rug's resonant properties to amplify that sound of water. And because it's using the rug, it translates into this very low rumbling sort of sound. To me, it feels like being inside of an aorta, or maybe like our bone exercise that we just did, or almost like being in a womb. So the condenser microphone on the top is actually picking up those sounds and also the sort of sounds within the room. And it's feeding it back into a larger sort of like bass amplifier that's off the rug elsewhere. So viewers are invited into the piece. They're invited to lay on it, touch it. Every touch will sort of affect the transmission of sound. Every presence of this in the room will affect the transmission of the sound as well. One of the beautiful things about it was seeing how perfect strangers would end up gathering around this piece, putting their head next to it, and again, sharing stories with each other about what it made them feel like. Someone said, oh, the ground is pregnant. And other people would tell stories. I remember someone else who was visiting the piece said that it reminds them of the practice of going to the tombstone and putting pressure on it is a sort of a customary thing for a loved one who's deceased. So I think a lot too about sounding and how sounding can be a tool for collectivized knowledge. And I think about the way that our sounds are developed to a certain region and the history of that. And I think about very much how this operates in some ways to ownership, privatization, authoritarianism, and also a counter to military colonial sounding devices that we might be much more in touch with now, such as satellites, speakers, right, telephone lines, all of these things. And this is by in no way anything to put any of these things down, but really becoming aware of our relationship to space and the technologies that we're using and how they're shaping us as well. I'll play a very brief kind of sound of it to give you an idea of what it sort of feels like in the space. These are the tops of the planets. They look like these craters almost on the landscape. These are all of those sort of wells or the top holes going across. So here I'm kind of just pointing them out. I'm actually going to fast forward because with our sounding exercise, we're a little bit tighter on time. But if we have time, I'll return to some of these a little bit later. So I'm going to hop over. I'm going to skip a few pieces, and I want to bring you directly to this piece. So this isn't actually the piece, that's just data, but I want to talk about Wadi. So Wadi is a interactive orchestral web browser event. So again, I was invited to do a residency at Minnesota Street Project, and it was a virtual residency. It developed during the times of the pandemic lockdowns and such. And I was really thinking of how do I make a virtual project? What does it mean to create something online as a web piece? How does that interact or inform things that I'm thinking about? So I decided to create something that looks like a virus on your computer and something that sort of takes over your computer. So Wadi, here we go. So Wadi is actually, it's a website that is with a single click transformed into a virtual river through multiple pop-up windows. In this piece, I was really interested in thinking about water and stock prices. So this is again, kind of around the lockdowns. We have a lot of the big fires that were happening in the Bay Area. And I started to notice that I don't really look at stocks, but I just started to take notice of the scarcity of water and how stock prices and water were becoming such a thing. I know they've been a thing, but it just seemed to feature a little bit more prominently. So I started to look a lot at these various international stocks in water. And I started to gather all the data. And what really interested me was how the terminology that we use for stock prices or the stock market are very similar to the way that we might talk about water. We might have, like, I was thinking about high tide and low tide, like when we're pulling the information. And so there were a lot of these terminologies and little words would pop up that were fascinating to me. So I was really interested also in a wadi. So wadi, it's an Arabic word for an ephemeral riverbed that may or may not be dry. So I found this also something really, for me, poetic, that we still consider it a river, even if there's no water in it. The water's presence doesn't determine it, right, what it is. So I was thinking a lot about how this term ephemeral is also used in stock markets, or at least used widely, and the sort of dependence on that ephemerality or the creation of scarcity or fabrication of scarcity in some ways. But in both cases, in both thinking about the wadi or with the stock market, I was thinking how this sort of creates a sense of something running out, whether it actually is or it's not, and what that presence means in this way. So I gathered all these stock prices, and then what I went ahead and I did is I just gathered a lot of data. Oh yeah, here's a bunch of data. And I then went to a lot of graphs, like graphs depicting the data. So pulling several, I think it was about 7 different international stocks in water from several different places. And I tracked that data. Then I downloaded images of that. And then I thought I'd be kind of kitchen away. And I then went and I downloaded thousands of stock photographs of water. So I just kind of typed water in there, downloaded a bunch of these, and I then used machine learning, not necessarily a fancy model, but I used a very entry-level machine learning program to then train the models. So these are the stocks as they're moving, and so I'm kind of, again, thinking about both of these at the same time. And in this next clip, it's going to move really fast, but I'm starting to now train them to the images of water. And so this is sort of what they all look like. This is just a grid. So these are all different images, different stocks trained to different waters. So the website itself looks something like this. It's currently not up at the moment, but it looks like this. So you go on there, you hit play, and one of the things I also noticed is a lot of these stock companies had very strange websites. The websites looked like they were made in like AOL days, and it was so you couldn't see anything. I couldn't really gather information about it. So I then on a different sort of page, on the about page, it sort of mimics that as well. So I'm kind of infiltrating that as well. And so you hit play with your mouse, you open up your computer, you hit play, and a bunch of screens pop up. And before they pop up, I'll sort of mention what the screens are. So each window that pops up is one of those stock footage water prices anyhow trained, and each of these are connected to a separate stock. And it pulls data, I forget, I think it was like, it pulls like a few points of data. And so it's never the same thing. And depending on the stock levels, if the stock prices are very high, I believe the water, I took a track of water, and it's like a stream of water, the water is sped up, sort of running out. If the stock is low, then that's great, we're all happy. The water is a little bit more regular. And so as you move each of these kind of like windows and such, or click around on them, you can also adjust the volume for each water. And so kind of create your own symphony in some ways, or your own sounds to it. In fact, multiple people can open up their laptops and have different things. So this is a little bit of what it's like. Oh, Kenny. I was thinking about, creating this web piece in some ways. I was thinking a lot about what it means to create something online through this format. I was thinking a lot about also, I learned that in computing, ghosting is a convenient means of upgrading an operating system, where certain contents and such are copied for duplication, but like that's for the ease of sort of accessibility in some ways. So in the piece Wadi, I was thinking about what this ghosting means and suggesting in some ways through this engagement of thinking about water, the sound of water, the images and the way that we think about images related to all of this, as really seeking to engage this notion that perhaps what does ghosting mean outside of computing as well? What does it mean as a larger experience? And that perhaps ghosts were never something that are of our past, but it's rather an inconvenience to or a refusal to acknowledge what is not or what is in our present time. So I'm going to hop over to another piece. I'm actually going to skip. I'll talk about this really briefly, actually. So this piece, Albedo, I'm sort of returning thinking about light a lot. So I became interested in albedo. Albedo is the what is it? It's the unitless measure that indicates a surface, body, or body's diffuse reflectivity of light. So thinking about electromagnetic radiation, the albedo of an ocean might be very different from the albedo of a tree, and I'm sorry, of an ocean might be very different from the albedo of a forest. And I learned that this also affects AM radio transmission. So all of these things came together in this piece, as well as fluorescent light. Thinking about fluorescent lights and just my hate of fluorescent lights. I'm very sensitive to them. And so I started to wonder why. Why do we have fluorescent lights? Why are fluorescent lights so insidious in our environment? And today we have less fluorescent lights, and it depends on how economically depressed a country or a region is, but LED lights are also created in that same image as well. So fluorescent lights were a very convenient means of, or I should say cost-effective means of ramping up factory production during the war and during World War II. So it was really kind of initiated as an emergency feature to keep the factories running 24/7. And it was also part of one of the first World's Fair, or the World's Fair, I think was in Chicago and such as well. So thinking about the electricity in there. So in albedo, I was working with a space that was historically a mortuary, and I became interested in working with these fluorescent lights and working with their with how they are able to intersect and affect AM radio transmission. So in this space, I got three large agricultural water containers. I was very much thinking also about different systems of also labor, but also systems of learning. So thinking about agriculture and water, I was thinking a lot about illumination and light, and how the spaces, if we think about our places of education, our prison systems, our museums, how they are illuminated, like what the actual source of illumination is and how that affects things that we, how we interact with the space and with each other and how we're knowledge building. And I was also thinking a lot about radio and the transmission of sound as well. So in this piece, I was crazy. I wired 76 fluorescent light bulbs to each other, and they're all daylight balanced. And I created molding that covers all of the sort of like features of the building. So it looks like it's built as part of the structure of the building. So instead of the lights being up, they're down. And on each ramp is a large agricultural water container, and each container is transduced with a legally pirated radio station. And each of these radio stations are transmitting my voice saying the alphabet in Farsi. So it's be, pe, te. So it's 3 letters specifically alternating as a sort of chorus. So each container has only one sort of transmission of my voice with the alphabet. But because fluorescent lights interfere with AM radio transmission, as does the albedo, and the environment, what's nearby, who's in the space, it's always different. I'll just play a little clip of what it sounds like when you're walking through the space, or a little video. It's listening to the electricity, and sometimes you can actually hear the radio coming through. It's a little harder to hear it through here, but as you're walking through the space, every curve, every sort of ramp changes the transmission of the sound, as does your body's relationship to it. And it was really interesting to make these things that we try to ignore or that we try to invisibilize, and that we try to sort of take away that noise. It was really interesting to make this audible and to make this into a very visual and oral experience. So what happens when we actually bring that into the space? How does that affect or make us think about other architectures and environments, illumination, sound, noise, communication as well? I'm going to skip over right now and bring it to this piece called Ghost Winds. So, okay. So, but one of the things I want to say about the piece, I'm not going to play that performance actually, is really think about what sounds are permissible in our environment. What are the things that we consider signal? What are the things that we consider noise? What are the things that we push down to push out of our vision? Whether it's flooding it with light or whether it's keeping it in darkness. What happens when we bring this sort of to the foreground and thinking about how we listen and how we interact with it. So I'm going to speak about this piece called Ghost Winds. One of the things, I think you had mentioned about sort of museums and installing works of sound art. So one of the things in my role as a sound artist is I've observed that oftentimes a lot of places struggle a little bit with how to facilitate public engagement of sound work. Again, it's a very leaky medium. It's something that, right, we're very accustomed to viewing or listening to something in silence or with a sense of purity. Right, having a sound piece next to a painting will affect your read of the painting. So again, I feel that while this is true with any work, it becomes that much more audible with a sound piece. It's that much more leaky. And so despite this sort of, I think, there's I think a lot of our visual focus is really relegated to thinking when we talk about sound, right? I think a lot of our visual focus is relegated to the technology, to talk about speakers, to talk about amplifiers, right? But how do we relate to the sound with our bodies in the first place? How do we relate to the sound of water? How do we relate to the sound of light bulbs and such? A friend of mine, or a colleague, I should say, Trust and Navita, we did a performance together, and I remember she had recalled, she spoke about trees as technology. She spoke about the ocean as technology. And yes, I think a lot about listening and how listening requires a criticality, particularly when we're engaging with various sort of recorded archival milieus that have privileged the image above all. So I think a lot about also the amplification of sound and its eventual liberation in some way from a wire transmission, right? And how can that generate a sense of, right, how are we relating to a place through that? So this piece is called Ghost Winds, and it's, let me bring it to this one. So this piece is called Ghost Winds, and it's currently at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. In this piece, I was invited to create something that's site specific, and I began to think about what it means to work with a site as opposed to working against it. What happens, what does it mean to place amplified sound over a location? And what are the sounds in there? What am I approaching this space as wanted or unwanted? What's noise and what's signal to me? So as I started to dig into the histories of the location, I started to find that I had a very hard time finding certain histories of the site. I was really interested into digging into some of the indigenous histories of the site, specifically of that area, and there was only so much that I could gather. So that lack of history and that sort of eradication led me to thinking a lot about the ghost creeks. So San Francisco was once filled or abundant with creeks that were beautiful and ran, and eventually as a direct result of settler colonialism and eventually the beautiful city that we see now, these creeks were filled to build more land, to build more of everything. So I thought a lot about how, again, like going back to that notion of the wadi and going back to that notion of what I hear and what I don't hear, and perhaps what I imagine to hear and what it could sound like. And I was really interested in exploring this relationship again, the bodily relation, and not just mine, but a collective connection to the site. So I used the ghost creeks as a sort of a stand-in for voice. And I'll get to that. And I decided to put them in conversation with a different place. I decided to put them in conversation with the Headlands of Iran, the waterways that are also soon to be extinct as well. So what I actually did was I went ahead, I pulled up about, I used 6 different recordings of water, of 6 different waterways, and I transcribed those recordings of waterways into notation, into musical notes, and I had some help from AI doing that. And when I transcribed those into AI, the sound was so intense, the notes. And I'll play one of them for you. This is like MIDI AI. So I literally just took the audio recording of one waterway and what would this be as musical notes? Oh wait, that's the waterway. This is the. It was really magical to hear what this would sound like as notes and to listen to water in this way. And imagine that it's saying something, that it's communicating something. So the idea was that I would also sing this. And that was a little bit intense. I tried so hard. So what I went ahead and I did, I picked out common motifs within it. I combined quarter notes into half notes into whole notes, and created a sort of a composition that was a little bit more manageable based on this. And that sounded something like this. I further worked with that and put that into voice. It's MIDI voice. Oh, sorry about that. That was on. So after that, I then noticed that, you know, it was all in Western scale music because of a lot of the devices that we use, right? A lot of the introduction of this is in that. And I was really interested in having a dialogue that's putting different locations and trying to dig into histories prior to some of that. So I worked very closely with a musical collaborator, 2 musical collaborators, Artadia Finalist, who is a brilliant Iranian composer, and Maslavahta, who is a world-renowned vocalist and singer. Some of you may recognize her, and dear mentor. So Artadia created variations on each of my compositions because he has a rich understanding of the Persian modal system. And so the Persian modal system is very different from the Western scales. What I learned through this process was that in Iran, the modal system tends to relate to different geographic regions. And those different sort of like, I'm just kind of shortening it as scales, don't necessarily interact with each other at all. They're usually very separate. But because we're using the actual water as our guide, or transcribing this from the water, we found that one single composition will actually travel through 3 different scales. And it was fascinating. It felt like we were unlocking some kind of a strange connection between how these places could have related, between how the music or how sounds could have originated in different places. We know that sounds originate very in direct relationship to the flora, the fauna, the environment, right? The building hums that we hear. It's develop through time and direct interaction from that. So suddenly we see that one composition is traveling through three regions that feel very distant from each other. So working with Massa and her knowledge of that, based on artifacts variations on my pieces, I worked with her, she trained me, and to put those into voice. So there's an aspect, what also has been fascinating me is like the aspect of thinking about orality or thinking about voice or thinking about listening is how much of that has to be passed through knowledge or through spoken or through experience. And the similarity that that has for me to a cuisine. So if you're cooking something or you're making a specific cuisine, you're working, even if it's a recipe that's been handed down, you're working with the land that you're on. You're, using the tomatoes that were either grown in your backyard or that you bought at the store. That affects the taste of the food, right? Our taste buds are also affected by where we are and how we experience that. But yet we're passing this down through cultures and through history. So I think about sound a lot in the same way as how a lot of these sounds that we experience, right? Not just the words that we say, but the inflections of our voice, the information that they carry, how encoded it is, that we may not realize because it's the thing that we want to get rid of. We consider it to be the noise, right? And how that affects the way that we come to understand ourselves and how it tunes our own listening. So the piece eventually is something, this is the video of it. So before I go into that, I should say, so what I end up doing is taking all of those different water songs, 6 different ones, and I actually map them out to this sculpture courtyard using a map of the Ghost Creeks. So I overlaid a map of the Ghost Creeks onto the sculpture courtyard, and I sort of use that as a spatial composition for the piece. So each sound spot, each of the sort of pink fuzzy spots or diffuse spots are a different water body song that I'm singing throughout this whole process. And these are using holosonic speakers, which have also had military uses, or at least the technology, it was developed in the Navy. But I'm rather using these to distribute these sort of songs throughout the environment. So the way that these speakers work is that they're very super directional. I could stand here and hear something, and then I could move here and not hear anything. So as you're navigating this courtyard, the idea is that the work isn't performing for you, but rather that there's an orchestration to your physical bodily relationship to the space and how you move through that space and what you discover. But rather that you're, it's not just what you discover, but it's the way that you're spending time and the way that your sort of your body is tuned to the space. So I took each of these different tracks and I also tuned them to the physical environment. If you've been to downtown San Francisco, it is so noisy. It's regular sirens, ambulances, everything, people. And this was something that I wanted to work with, not against. So how do I work with these city sounds? So as you're walking through the courtyard, you might, there's little spots on the ground that indicate where, it's a sort of a white mica powder with sort of a reflecting that might indicate where you might hear something, or you can use the map to navigate your way around. And I'll play a little video of it. So I'm using a lot of the walls, the building areas to reflect sound. So this map is available as a transparency that you can physically take around with you to the piece. So in the center is this organoid sculpture that's both modeled, it's a parabola, so it's both modeled off of the water clocks, but also off of the stick here. All the drone sounds are also my voice stretched to the pitch of the face. So I'll bring it over to this piece and I'll wrap up with us listening to one of the pieces. Well, I do want to share one project as well after that. So kind of going back to the planets, this is a piece that also I'm thinking again, thinking with the water, thinking with space. I'm actually currently working on this project where I'm making 3D prints of my breath. So I'm using my breath to cast a mold, and then I'm getting that as a 3D rendered piece that's brought back. So these are some of the prototypes for it. The top right is actually the piece, a test piece, and the bottom two are prototypes. So this piece, I'm going back, thinking about the waterways, thinking about the labor that goes into them, very much like mining, and the importance of breath within this. And the lack of breath as well. So there's something about kind of casting this voice or casting this breath across space and what that could be. So I'll wrap up, because we're at time, I'll wrap up, or what I said would be our time. I'm gonna just wrap up playing one of the clips of the vocal pieces that are from the waterway. Wrap up, I think a lot, again, going back to the politics of sound, thinking about sound as a sea in constant movement, thinking about sound as diasporic, as dissonant, and think about how sound can act as a sort of is a medium that can reveal leaks, that can expose fissures and mediums that attempt to contain it, whatever those structures might be. And I think a lot of times this is probably why, because of this leakiness, I turn to the ocean and the waters as a guide. And one of the questions that I come back to, where I always come back to the water, when I feel that I'm drifting too close to shore, when I feel that I'm drifting too close to answer seeking, I go back to the sort of like the depths of this, and thinking about how to work with sounds assumed up as opposed to against it, and in some ways how to sort of divine these possibilities, and thinking about the ocean and these oceanic aspects as being vast and endless. That's all. Thank you.
I'm gonna we have a short time, so we're just gonna go through some questions. If you have any questions, please.
Well, first, Sholeh, thanks for coming. Lisa, Lauren, great, thank you. And I know time is short, and I guess I want to thank all of my CCI friends for coming. It feels very nice, and I hope in the future when these opportunities come, we'll have an opportunity to get together and sort of understand the kinds of art and we share new experiences. But I could ask many questions, but in light of the time, you know, most art is something that's visual and you're interacting, seeing something on a wall. It's clear that this is art that is not about that. It's, you know, obviously sound. You want you want people that are looking at your art to interact with it, and presumably you want them to take something away from this. So are there any sort of grand themes that you would like people that interact with your art to sort of take away? Is it sort of an appreciation for sound in a different way, or place, or culture, or anything that you want to sort of leave the viewer with? Because it's obviously not a lot of music. jarring, and that's purposeful, so.
This was the most melodic I get.
So I was just curious what you want us to leave with.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful question. Thank you for that. A million things ran through my mind, but I think really I'm less, well, but I'm going to contradict myself because I was going to say I'm less interested in the work sort of dictating a specific experience, but then here's a contradiction is I think my ultimate hope and success and pleasure and interest is that even if for a millisecond, someone visiting the work or interacting with the work, even if it's just a second, has a moment of imagination and has a moment of possibility. And to me, that's huge. So I don't ask for much, but I think for me, that's the biggest thing, because I think of those moments of sparks and imagination and possibility or making connections through your own experience. I think of them as seeds. And if we can have more of those seeds throughout our experience, throughout the everyday, how beautiful. Yeah.
Is it special equipment that you use to get this sound? Like, for example, a mic, amplifier, and a speaker? Is it more than that?
It would be lovely if it was. There's a quote, I forget which photographer, but it was like the best camera. The best camera the best camera is the camera you have. And so I think in the future, I would like to expand and work with a lot of different types of equipments, but the holosonic speakers, the super directional ones, those are very specific.
Well, the sound of the water is what I'm thinking of.
Oh,
How do you get these sound?
so various places. I have hydrophones, so I use the hydrophones, and I also, I don't show that work, but I also use geophones as well. And sometimes I also just use, if I need a sound of a specific place that I can't access, I might just use a phone recording. If I can't get that. So for example, with some of the waterways, let's say when I was thinking about the Headlands in Iran, I can't really necessarily access that right now. Yeah. So it's very much idea driven or concept driven, and what I need to sort of get to move towards that.
Any other questions? I actually have one question, but Carmen, go ahead.
So the last thing you just said, going back to your advice to your students, not looking for answers to other questions. So you're essentially equating ideas and questions and imagination and thinking.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. It's for bringing that all together. I think absolutely as a continuum. I feel an idea is a possibility, right? An idea is something that hasn't yet materialized, right? And so an idea can also fail when it materializes. And an idea, right? And in that materialization of it, if you let it, it can become something else. And I think that's one of the things that I constantly return to is, what is it telling me? So I started with an idea. I had some questions and concepts, but what is the material or the medium that I'm working with? What is that now telling me that it needs to become? Because perhaps that idea was just something to start with. And if I stick to it sometimes, I might be limiting myself and limiting my imagination. It's just something that grows. And so what are the ways to sort of expand that? And I think ultimately, like, what are the ways to collectively expand that as well, right? So I have a lot of projects that are very collective sort of focused, sound kind of practices or performances or exercises and pieces. And again, like, how can we construct this space together? And how can that imagination be used as a tool for better and for openness? Yeah.
So I promise Sholeh, I'm not gonna ask this question.
Oh, no, you are.
So my question was, share a fun fact about your art, but she shared so much that I'm not gonna, I mean, it's like meaningless to ask that question now, because we shared a lot of fun facts tonight, and we all really appreciate it. But I do wanna, understand how you collaborate with other sound artists. I know that you're collaborating with musicians and producers, but how do you do that with, I mean, do you have any pieces? Have you done any work?
Yeah, actually, I'm working, it's sort of been sitting on the shelf, but there's an album that I've been working on. It was through residency at Berkeley Art Center last year, and it used the Majlis, the sounding exercise that we did together. It used that as a way to make connections with each other in space. So that piece, it was part of this larger piece that I have called Majlis. It became this thing called Sunday Sessions at Berkeley Art Center. So I cast a wide net to writers, musicians, sound artists, dancers, thinkers, poets. And the idea was that we had for about, I think, 5 or 7 Sundays in a row, we had 3 hours to get together. And the first hour was discussing certain things and setting up things. And the next 2 hours was only about exploring those concepts non-verbally. So a lot of this piece was based on, there were a lot of things happening. There were a lot of, I think, like labor strikes at that time with certain universities, the graduate students at Berkeley, some stuff happening with museums, and also it was sort of at the height of the woman life freedom movement in Iran. And again, I really felt this isn't a time to have an attention on the individual. This feels like a time of like, how do we explore this with each other? How do we connect versus separate from each other through these various experiences? I think one of the kind of common things is, okay, well, you know, segregating groups, and you're going through something, this group's going through something, we don't know how to talk. So I don't want to sort of say something. And so I really noticed this, and I noticed myself feeling very isolated because it was during the woman life freedom movement. And so I decided to cast this wide net. We came together in this space. We explored some of the things that were moving through outside of these places. We had folks from all over, and then we made connections between that and the physical space that we were in. So for example, one of the pieces that we did, where Berkeley Art Center is a very round space, it's very resonant. All the sounds kind of seem to resonate and become one eventually. So we were talking a lot about the sort of like need to sometimes, when does something necessitate sort of the individual voice, and when does something necessitate a more, a collective voice? Like, what is the, what's the conflict between that? What is the push and pull, right? When do you have to drop out and to become part of something larger, and when do you need to sort of be? So we used that and made a score, so a visual kind of graphic score to the space. So we had a circle, we took the resonant frequency of the room, which was like 407, I think. And then we had this piece, we had 1 hour to kind of explore this in our physical relationship. So again, bringing these various ideas and seeing what happens when we're in space. So it was pretty wild actually, and it was beautiful. So we have 6 different tracks, no, 5, I forget, 5 or 7 different tracks from the series. And the public was invited, but the notion was we weren't performing for them. So the public would come and observe us. And if we decided that part of the score was that we need to rest, we need to rest, we could be napping. And that was a part of the piece. So again, like, how do we think about our bodily, like, how do we think about our relationship to each other, the utility of it, but also, again, it's our relationship to the physical space. And so instead of kind of separating these outer and inner spaces and kind of compartmentalizing them, exploring them. So this became, it's an album that I'm working on. It's going to be, I think at some point, I have just so much work to do on it, released, and I'm working on that as well. A beautiful album. There's so many different musicians on each track and writers as well. And each track or each album is only one of the scores, and it also comes with the actual visual graphic score, is like a drawing that anyone can interact with. So that's, I mean, that's one of the ways, is I think, is really coming together to build something and seeing what it's going to be. And again, I think of this project as something that seeded a lot more And I think it really became a way for us to also process and be together creatively at a time that might have been difficult to do so. So kind of again, like, how do you turn in instead of turning away is one of the notions. And, you know, whether it's with a collective, whether it's right with our ideas or sharing the ideas or with a place, like how do you tune into the place and what it means? Yeah. Good, beautiful, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, how would I visited this installation with Lauren, and we were really impressed, and we actually got very interested in the whole marking on the grounds of where the sounds are coming from. It's actually rainbow. I don't know if you noticed it in the photos, but because of the mica in
Glass
that,
road
you know,
beads as well.
or and glass beads,
Yeah.
just beautiful rainbow forms in the spots that you can go and listen to Sholeh's work. And it's still in Yerba Buena Art Center. And I was just gonna ask, where else can the audience actually experience it, or do you have new installations coming up that people can go to?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's glass road beads, which is the same reflective property that's used in the freeway road lines, and mica powder onto the ground, so it sort of reflects. And so when you're there, I think a lot about the piece is, you know, the way that you might walk down a street or a city, and you might hear music from a car or the radio from a car that has I don't even know if anyone has radio anymore. But like, you might hear music from a car that has its radio rolled down, its window rolled down, and you just walk by and you hear something else, and you might hear a conversation and bits. And so the space is kind of like that, and these reflective, subtly reflective spaces on the ground, or they light up when it's sunny. Otherwise it could look like it's a part of the place. So again, how to orchestrate that movement through the space, as opposed to saying, stand here, you will hear sound, go here, you will hear sound. So I do have a few other pieces currently exhibited in the city. One of them is a series of prints. It's at California Institute for Integral Studies, and these are prints created using my breath, and they're embossments on paper, and they're mappings of the canals, of the waterways. So they're aerial view mappings of these waterways on paper, and that's going to be up until July. And a few other things I'm trying to remember. Audio archive booth. So I have an archival project that gathers histories and oral sort of histories and information from those mostly in the Iranian diaspora, but I never turn anyone away. And so it's collected entirely on magnetic tape. So again, there's a very much a historicity to the use of that medium. And I'm pointing here because Del Holton, who is here with us, is the brilliant curator for the exhibition that it's part of currently at Summa Arts. It's called Where Is Your Body? And so
Adele is a PhD student at Stanford. So
yeah, and it's part of APIC, and so it's a really amazing exhibition. So that's over there, and there's a few other things, but I can't actually remember at the moment. But I do have Pacific Standard Time. I'm part of Pacific Standard Time with the Getty, and I've been a fellow with UCLA Art Sci for the last year or two. And that larger show that we're part of, will open in September and actually continue through the end of May.
yeah, and many artists who we have invited for this program will be part of that show.
And I'm also performing at, oh yes, they are. A lot of them are part of it. So that's been very exciting to work on and to develop working towards that. And I am performing, it's a performance this Sunday at 500 Cap Street in San Francisco. So there's a bunch of other stuff going on anyhow, but please, I look forward to hanging out with you and getting to know you, and happy to share all of these. Yeah, just share the few.
Do you have a website?
I do. Yeah, it's just I could share it with you. SholehAsgary.com.
Send it out.
Yeah. So most of these are on there, but really.
And my last question.
Oh, we have one more.
It's a fun fact.
I thought we were off the hook. Oh my gosh, a fun fact.
Well,
Well-
maybe related to the tour.
Yes, thank you for the hints. Okay, so the fun fact today, was, Lauren gave me a tour, yeah, of the anatomy department at Stanford, and so that was so fascinating. It was my first time seeing cadavers. And yeah, it was really fascinating, and to think about just the various layers in the body, and just it was amazing. It was truly amazing. So I think that is that actually might be a highlight of of my month. It was
Yeah.
really exciting too. Yeah.
One of the bones.
Well, I think I left my bone there.
Well, thank you very much, Sholeh.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
This was wonderful.